This video is sponsored by Fabulous, the #1 self-care app to help you build better habits and achieve your goals. If there's any place to talk about NIMBYs, it's San Francisco. There may be no city with a stronger, more organized resistance to high-density development anywhere in the United States. And if you ask members of organizations like Citizen Marin, Better Cupertino, and Palo Altans for sensible zoning, that's a great thing, something to be proud of. Their efforts help keep the Bay Area the low-density oasis it is today. But a 2021 survey of Bay Area residents named homelessness and housing as the #1 and #2 problem facing the region. Housing prices are in the stratosphere and not leveling off, due in part to a lack of housing construction in the region. Teachers, nurses, and the essential workers of the pandemic are having a hard time finding housing they can afford without driving from places like Stockton and Modesto. The not in my backyard phenomenon is not new or relegated to coastal cities like San Francisco. NIMBYs have been showing up at community meetings and voting for anti-density candidates in local elections for a long time.
I know this is a highly charged political planning topic, and I must admit I'm not a neutral party here. I believe that the NIMBY mindset is ultimately selfish and exacerbates climate change and inequities. But I also believe in understanding the perspective of others, even if it's just to know what you're up against. So let's get into it after the bike bell. I'm going to start this video by giving the most charitable explanation of the NIMBY mindset, and it's right there in the name, my backyard. There are some land uses where you just don't want to live next to them, even though the whole community needs it. You have a situation where the downsides are localized, but the benefits are evenly distributed, and those living next to that unwanted land use might understandably feel put out.
This is the reason the smart move in SimCity is to put your power plant in the corner of the map. Everyone benefits from its electricity, but nobody wants it polluting their backyard. All of your Sims are essentially NIMBYs when it comes to power plants. And I'm sure you'd feel the same way if that situation were occurring in real life in your backyard. That's one of the fundamental reasons cities adopt zoning codes in the first place. It preemptively presents extremely obvious and understandable NIMBY concerns. But the definition of extremely obvious and understandable is not the same for everyone. Perhaps the most common and most contentious land use that draws a NIMBY reaction is high-density housing. And high-density housing can be defined as anything more than single-family homes.
That's why I'm discussing this topic here in San Francisco. The entire Bay Area region has a population of nearly 8 million people. And despite that large population, nearly 50% of the land area in San Francisco is zoned for single-family homes only, including the one I'm standing in right now. And this neighborhood is almost 2 miles from the Trans-America Pyramid. That's the financial district. This neighborhood behind me is so close to a huge number of jobs that logic would suggest that it would be teeming with mid or high-rise towers, yet most of these lots are filled with only one single-family house.
It's easy to blame zoning for this situation, but that zoning is there and still there because many residents don't want to see any high-density housing in their backyards. They want the zoning code to stay the same. On the surface, some of that localized downsides distributed benefits logic applies here. Many NIMBY residents will mention increases in traffic, the increases in the demand for parking, noise concerns, and shadows that they believe high-density housing will bring to their immediate vicinity. But what they really want is all the benefits of suburban living, with single-family houses on quiet streets, with all the benefits of urban living and the proximity to amenities. In fact, NIMBYs in cities like San Francisco are essentially importing suburban expectations and land use controls into central cities. In the post-war years, wealthier, mostly white households fled cities for the suburbs. By the 2000s, the trend had begun to reverse, with many wealthier and white households making their way back into cities. And they brought their exclusionary regulations with them. Over the last 30 years, many cities like San Francisco have seen an increase in stringent zoning, historic preservation, and environmental regulations that make it much more costly to build new high-density housing. There have been some recent successes in loosening zoning codes to allow for accessory dwelling units and eliminating parking requirements, for example. But these small improvements are still outweighed by the recent turn toward making many central cities the same as exclusionary suburbs. For many people able to afford a single-family home in the city of San Francisco, they can have their cake and eat it too. All the benefits of your own house, while being very close to jobs, schools, shopping, restaurants, and cultural institutions. Again, it's not hard to see why people in this situation would fight so hard to preserve this location advantage. This is the deep, fundamental motivation of the NIMBY mindset. Maximize the benefits for me and minimize the drawbacks for me. Like I said in the beginning of this video, it's fundamentally a selfish mindset, but it's also one I can empathize with because we're all a little bit selfish at times. I mean, nobody's perfect. The problem is that NIMBYs often have a lot of power and wealth and can inflict that selfishness on the city at large. You might be thinking, how can anyone be that selfish? I would never do something like that. The thing is, NIMBYs don't see themselves as the villain. They see themselves as defenders. Defenders of historic architecture, defenders of property values, and defenders against state intrusion on local control. Let's talk about each of those. San Francisco is an incredibly beautiful historic city. And like many cities, it has landmarks and historic districts to preserve the most important examples of historic or culturally significant buildings. Few people would argue that the idea of historic preservation is a bad one. The founding myth of historic preservation is the destruction of beautiful Penn Station in New York to make way for the less beautiful Madison Square Garden. But landmark districts and buildings add additional development regulations that can make it difficult to build more housing. The results can sometimes be comical. A historic preservation board in Seattle rejected a project for 200 housing units that would replace a parking garage because the new building at 12 stories would be too tall for the surrounding historic buildings, despite the fact that the building was within the height limit allowed in the zoning. The NIMBYs got their way and the plan changed to a 7-story office building. No new housing. These conflicts are only increasing as residential development pressure increases and as the marginal benefit of adding new historic districts decreases. You see, most historic areas have already been protected by now. Yet, landmarking has been consistent since the 1960s and may have even been accelerating in recent years. Marking a building, corridor, or neighborhood as historic is one tool NIMBYs can use to embalm a neighborhood while feeling good about themselves. They're defending the cultural and historic character of the place. They put themselves on the same team as Jane Jacobs and Jackie Kennedy, both in favor of the preservation of old buildings. But buildings aren't the only thing getting preserved. So too are the property values. Property values are one of the most cited reasons NIMBYs give for maintaining the status quo. Here in the United States, homeownership is one of the primary forms of wealth accumulations households have. And when you have an investment like that, you want to protect it, and wealthier homeowners have more to lose. The safest play is no new development at all, as you don't risk any of the localized downsides. As a secondary benefit, opposing new housing creates scarcity, which increases property values further. This is another selfish argument, but NIMBYs see it as preserving everyone's property values, not just their own. It's all about putting the needs of the existing community ahead of anyone who might want to move in. The irony here is that new multifamily housing often doesn't have an impact on property values at all, and in some cases can increase it. Property values are complicated and are as much about market forces as local opposition to new housing. There's one last area where NIMBYs cast themselves as defenders of local control over land use decisions from the state government. If you look into any of the websites of NIMBY groups out there, and I don't recommend that you do, you're going to see a reference to local control. This is especially true in California, where the housing crisis is most acute, and the state government has begun to pass laws to encourage cities to plan for more housing. Recently, NIMBY groups have been running slates of candidates in local elections to oppose these state mandates and reject new development proposals. And in some cases, like in wealthy Cupertino, they have been successful. In that city, a majority of the council was endorsed by the organization Better Cupertino and has taken an anti-housing, anti-state government stance. So NIMBYs aim to minimize the impact of new development on their properties and see themselves as defenders against evil outsiders. But they must have some understanding that their actions are contributing to the housing crisis and inequality generally, right? Well, kind of, and it's really not their problem. NIMBYs see it like this. First, not in my backyard. Not all NIMBYs are opposed to new housing, just not next door, on my block, or in my city. Second, they don't believe the statistics. Some NIMBYs believe that there's already enough housing built, and much of it's just sitting vacant. Others believe population growth forecasts are too high, and housing demand is overstated. Finally, they're standing up against the evil capitalist real estate developers, and anyone supporting these greedy capitalists are the real villains in this story. I'm not trying to exaggerate or create straw men here. I've left links to sources in the description below. And not all NIMBYs are the same. In fact, there's one group of NIMBYs I actively sympathize with. Those are the folks left behind in the white flight era who are now being impacted as people move back into cities. I'm talking about places like ethnic enclaves, the safe havens for immigrants that rely on a tight-knit community and affordable housing to succeed. They have a solid case for housing development not in their backyard. Perhaps surprisingly, NIMBYs not from marginalized groups will use this argument against gentrification and displacement in their own neighborhoods, even where it doesn't make sense. NIMBYs seek to minimize change in cities because they benefit from the status quo. There may be some limited reasons to take a NIMBY stance, but most do so to hold on to the advantages they have and pull up the drawbridge on anyone else seeking the same opportunities. Upending the NIMBY status quo in cities can be tiring and time-consuming. I know that between making these videos, teaching as a professor, and raising 3 kids, there's not a lot of time left over for working on me. Luckily, there's an app that can help me and you turn healthy behaviors into habits. Fabulous is perfect for anyone looking to improve their focus, live healthier, and have more energy at the end of the day. Fabulous's approach is rooted in behavioral science that helps you build and maintain healthy habits. You can do this for a single specific habit like regular meditation, exercise, and stretching by telling the app which habits you want to build, or you can take one of their curated journeys which collects a number of habits together for you. Now, I went a little hard on the Christmas cookies this year, and I'm looking to reduce the number of carbs I've included in my diet. I chose a 7-day low-carb challenge to motivate me and get me back in the habit of sticking to more proteins and vegetables. And it's working, and I'm achieving my health goals faster than I would without Fabulous. Whether you want to improve your sleep, concentrate more, eat healthier, build self-discipline, or any one of the other mini habit changes, Fabulous can help you get there. Getting started is easy because the first 100 people to click on the link in the description will get 25% off a premium subscription.